Hello and welcome back to Under the Bonnet. It's been a while, hasn't it? This is our first one of this year. We finished last year looking at Isaiah. We got to about Isaiah 9 and 10, and we're picking up in Isaiah 11 this week. So lots to talk about. I'm going to hand over to Fiona. We're going to read the passage and then we'll look into it.
So great, I'm just going to read Isaiah 11 verse 1 through to 12 verse 6. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt and faithfulness the sash around his waist. The wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. Infants will play near the hole of the cobra, young children will put their hands into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. Ephraim's jealousy will vanish and Judah's enemies will be destroyed. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, nor Judah hostile towards Ephraim. They will swoop down on the slopes of Philistia to the west. Together they will plunder the people to the east. They will lay hands on Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites will be subject to them. The Lord will dry up the gulf of the Egyptian sea with a scorching wind. He'll sweep his hand over the Euphrates River. He'll break it up into 7 streams so that anyone can cross over in sandals. There will be a highway for the remnant of his people that is left from Assyria, as there was for Israel when they came up from Egypt. In that day, you will say, I will praise you, Lord. Although you were angry with me, your anger has turned away and you have comforted me. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord is my strength and my defence. He has become my salvation. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. In that day you will say, give praise to the Lord. Call on his name, make known among the nations what he has done, and proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. So there's a lot there, a lot to take in, and we just wanted to just go back a little bit and see how chapter 11 fits into what we've looked at so far from chapters 1 to 10. Basically, as Andy was saying on Sunday, the melody of Isaiah is God's little people Judah facing difficulty and danger from enemies. And the way that God offers them a rescue for that, or more obviously a rescuer. If we look at the context of chapter 11, we get a sense of the danger that little Judah is in from their enemy in the north, Assyria. If you look back into chapter 10, there's this picture of Assyria, this mighty enemy, is pictured like a forest marching towards little Judah. If you look at chapter 10, verse 28 and following, you'll see the progress of this mighty army, like huge forest, marching up to shake their fists at little Judah. And you get the sense of the progress through these places as it moves, the army moves further and further. And then verse 32 of chapter 10, this day they will halt at Nob, they will shake their fist at the mount of daughter Zion, at the hill of Jerusalem. So this is the danger that Judah is in, God's people. And you wonder what on earth has gone wrong. As Andy said on Sunday, God's promised that he will have a people for himself, this nation of Judah. And it seems like they're going to be decimated by this terrifying army, the Assyrians. But what this terrifying army doesn't realise is that they get as far as shaking their fist at Jerusalem, but we know from the introduction to Isaiah, right back at the beginning, that they don't destroy Jerusalem. They shake their fists and they are destroyed. We remember that the Lord sends out his powerful angel who kills 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. One angel does that. And that's what is being referred to in chapter 10, verse 33 and 34. See, the Lord Almighty will lop off the boughs with great power. The lofty trees will be felled. The tall ones will be brought low. He will cut down the forest thickets with an axe. So there's this sense that this terrifying army of Assyria is going to meet what I read in one of the commentaries, the divine axeman. And this enemy of Judah is going to be destroyed. This huge forest of soldiers is going to be decimated. And that's just before leading up to the passage that we're looking at today. And I think that contrasts really well with this little stump of Jesse and this wonderful shoot coming up from it, as Andy was describing in the sermon on Sunday. So that the question is David's line finished? Is Judah going to be destroyed? Is David's line finished? Are God's promises to his people going to be forgotten? And the answer is no.
Good.
So Andy, just remind us what you were saying yesterday. You're the ultimate hero, the answer to this problem.
Well, yeah, so we originally called the whole thing the cosmic hope. Yeah. And I think that the reason is because up until now in the Bible, salvation has always been very temporary and very specific. And so if there's been a salvation, it's been God rescuing the people of Israel from Egypt. It's been God rescuing them again and again and again under the period of the judges.
And then another enemy comes in and thumps them,
always
or
same,
attempts to
just
thump them.
the constant same old. And what is promised here is not just Judah is going to enjoy a period of rest and so on. It's the whole world will enjoy that. So I've called it the ultimate kind of hero, the ultimate leader, the ultimate reversal, and then the ultimate rescue.
So not just delivery from the Assyrians, because we know that once the Assyrians have been obliterated, another army will, the Babylon, as you said yesterday, will come and attack God's people. So the ultimate is important.
I think this is difficult because I think as Christians we're constantly looking for God to just rescue us in the present from the present crisis, because we're in crisis. We all have crises, and some of them are quite short-lived and acute. Other of them are quite long-term and chronic.
Yeah.
And we want God just come and rescue me now, please. And I think this is where it's difficult, because sometimes gloriously he does. I mean, no question about it. And probably we've all got stories like that. But he hasn't done it again and again and again and again. What he has done is been with us in that crisis and helped us and strengthened us and shaped us and formed us, but he hasn't necessarily done what we want. And I think that's quite important just to say up front. But he promises that one day he won't just sort out our little problems, he'll sort out all the problems. Okay. Now, in order to do that, you have to have a pretty great leader, pretty great hero. And that's what's described in verses 1 to 5 of chapter 11. And as you said, this hero will come exactly as we expected from the line of David, stump of Jesse, David's dad, wasn't it? And I think what is remarkable about that is that God doesn't just get rid of that stump. Because if I've got a stump in my garden, I don't want to get rid of the thing. It's a pain in the neck. But God's willing to be patient and wait until the shoot comes. In this case, 700 years until the shoot came. And fulfill all of his promises to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob.
And it looks very unlikely, doesn't it? Because as you said, a dead stump in the garden, you're not going to, you're not going to hold out much hope for that. But I love the way the stump, the pictures Isaiah uses are so powerful, aren't they? So you've got this mighty forest of Assyrians being felled, and then you've got this dead stump and a shoot coming up. But even in verse 1, the stump isn't just a thing, it's a person, isn't it? It's his roots, a branch will bear fruit, the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him.
Yes.
So the stump is actually a person.
Well, the shoot's a person,
The shoot is a person, because Isaiah doesn't mind kind of mixing his pictures around, does he? Yeah, so that is really significant. So just your headings were...
the ultimate hero, the ultimate reversal, the ultimate rescue.
So just tell us about, just briefly, what excites you about him being the ultimate hero.
Well, I think verse 3 is important, isn't it? This is somebody who fears the Lord and who delights in the fear of the Lord.
So he doesn't just fear the Lord, he delights in the fear of the Lord.
He delights in the fear of the Lord.
So what's the difference? What's delighting in the fear of the Lord? Why is that better than just fearing the Lord?
Because you could grudgingly fear the Lord, dutifully fear the Lord. But here is one who delights in it, who sees that this is good, that this is precious, that this is sweet. And so what does that mean? I think in this case it means somebody who's utterly devoted to the Lord. And I was saying that we're very suspicious about that. So Alistair Campbell famously said, "We don't do God" during Tony Blair's premiership. And the reason is because he knows the British people are very suspicious of that. A bit of religious fervour. Oh gosh, what's he going to do, you know? And well, the answer is that somebody who is totally devoted to God acts in the way that we see here. So they have God's spirit of wisdom and understanding and counsel and might and knowledge and fear. So somebody who is gifted to the nth degree in every way. But it's also somebody then who acts, verse 4, for the needy, the poor of the earth. He doesn't act just... Well, he doesn't act in his interest.
And he sees, so he doesn't just look at the surface of things. He actually sees what's really going on, down to the root of things. It's not just a quick decision. He doesn't just make quick decisions.
That's right.
And he's not just got the wisdom, but he's got might in verse 2 as well, hasn't he? So he's not just a kind of wise person. He's a powerful person as well, able to carry out what he wants to do.
Yes, so in every situation he knows the right thing to do. So just, think about that for a moment. All of us find ourselves in situations with our family or work or friends where we're going, I just don't know what to do. And then we ask some advice and we get even more confused. Well, he knows what to do. But then we have situations where we know what to do, but we don't have the power to do it. Well, he has the power to do it. Isn't that great? Somebody who knows what to do in every situation, and then he has the power to carry that through. And of course, that's what you see with the Lord Jesus Christ. That's exactly how he lived. Beautiful.
And that he will get rid of the wicked. He will get rid of evil and wickedness. It's a very powerful picture, isn't it? The second half of verse 4. He'll strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. This is judgment, isn't it? that this is talking about there in verse 4. So this is, as you said, this is the end time. This is talking about, this is Judgment Day.
And we're nervous about that, aren't we? With the breath of his lips, he'll slay the wicked, and we find that uncomfortable because we know on one hand we're included among the wicked, and we find that very, very uncomfortable. But the answer is the wicked are those who turn away from the living God.
Yeah. So the wicked in Isaiah are those who rebel against God's rule, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes. And this ultimate reversal. What really struck you about that?
Oh, I mean, aren't these great? I mean, it's interesting. We read them. We had at the 9 o'clock as they were being read. You could hear people gasping.
Really?
Yeah, you could hear people going, just going, oh yes.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
It's
kind of like Narnia, isn't it?
Well, it's. I mean, I said it's a bit like Dr. Dolittle. It's dreamlike because we can't imagine a wolf living with a lamb. It's not possible. A leopard lying down with a goat, calf, like they eat each other, right?
Yes.
And yet, there's a lot here. It's worth saying he's picturing that ultimate reverse, that ultimate place of security and safety, that place where we're broken out of this wretched cycle of crisis and rescue to a place where the ultimate crisis is past, the judgment of God, and we have the ultimate rescue where the ultimate reversal where we're enjoying being with God in God's place, under his rule. It's just delightful, and it's hard to imagine. But I think the pictures he's giving us are to say two things. So I think the first one is simply saying a little, you help me with this, it's a lad, isn't it? A little lad, it's like one
like
of our...
Like a sort of 3-year-old lad.
Yeah.
Who you probably wouldn't trust with a blunt knife to put it on the table when you're laying the table, would you? Let alone...
But he's leading these,
a wild animal
both
around.
Wild animals and agricultural animals, if you like, and he's leading them out quite happily. And the reason is because that horrible situation where the fall has created a fracture between us and our Creator, but also between us and our creation. Well, that's now been healed, and so the animals don't fear us. All the kind of the fight. We often talk, don't we, about fighting creation, battling creation. There are firefighters battling the wildfires in California, and it just goes on and on, doesn't it? Well, it's all gone. I mean, right now, a member of our church is in the West Country, helping to reconnect power for thousands of people who have no electricity.
From the storms,
The reason is because the storms.
Yeah.
So we're fighting it, we're battling it. That's all gone.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Then the second thing, I think it's deliberate. The infant playing near the cobra's den and the young child will put its hand in the viper's nest. This is the serpent, the old enemy, Satan, evil. Well, that poison has been destroyed. Satan has been destroyed. And now a little baby playing with a viper.
It's just unthinkable, isn't it? We
it's
just
not
had
scary.
nippers, and you mums would never put their child down on the floor, with any danger around anywhere near it. Even a cup of tea is kind of is put out of the way, isn't it? So it is just completely unthinkable to us. And then summed up in verse 9,
it's great,
they will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. It is wonderful, isn't it? And I guess the reason for it is because of relationship with the Lord. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord.
Yes.
So it's because knowledge refers to relationship, doesn't it, in Hebrew? Because the relationship with the Lord has been restored and has been made perfect, that will mean that will have implications for the whole of creation, a sort of complete reversal of the curse, or the curse on Adam and Eve.
So you look at an ocean and you see waters stretching, covering everything as far as the eye can see. Well, this will be a day when the knowledge of the Lord, relationship with God, covers everything as far as the eye can see. There's nothing left out. There's no like kind of little jagged rock sticking out proudly, defiantly going, I will not submit to God. Everybody is doing what the hero's doing, delighting in the fear of the Lord.
And it's such a contrast, because this holy mountain it's talking about, presumably, is Mount Zion, where Judah is. And at the moment, Judah is under extreme threat of being destroyed. So it's just like, you wonder what the original heroes would have made of this.
Well, external threat from their enemies and internal threat
because of their sin. You wonder what they would have thought Isaiah was talking about here. It would be fascinating to know what they actually... Well, I think he didn't go down particularly well, did he, with the original heroes? He faced a lot of opposition. And then moving on
just important to say there then that reversal is what God is bringing us into. We experience temporary reversals a lot, and we rejoice in it. This is ultimate. I just want to keep underlining that.
This is heaven.
This is heaven. This is what we're looking forward to. This is our great hope as Christians, that the knowledge of the Lord will fill the earth as the waters cover the sea. So I just want to underline
it's a real place. It's like this world. It's
yes.
not some airy-fairy place of sitting on
but
clouds.
hard for us to imagine. And I think this is what Isaiah was trying to do, just trying to picture it for us. But even then it's hard. Sorry.
It's hard for us to get it. And so then moving on to this ultimate rescue, it's like we've got this wonderful picture of Eden and animals, primarily animals, and then it kind of switches to people. So just kind of talk us through that, I guess, particularly verse 10.
So in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. So it's what Israel always should have done. So Israel was God's people to be a witness to the nations. And now, finally, the nations are flooding in to the Lord and to Zion, his resting place. And it's a glorious kind of day. And verse 11, you have all these different places. I mean, to us, they're peculiar places, but to them, it was the whole known world. And it was far and near, and it was hostile and friendly. Doesn't matter. God will reach out his hand to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people.
So God's people aren't just Judah. God's people will come from all the surrounding nations, which again is a real surprise. And the original hearers, that would have been a surprise to them. Although they were meant to be a light to the nations, it wasn't how they were living, was it? So it's lovely, isn't it? Verse 12, he'll raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel, assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. Again, I guess like there's harmony between the animals. This is kind of harmony between God's people, isn't it?
He describes that Ephraim, their jealousy. So Ephraim was the northern kingdom of Israel. Their jealousy.
There'd been civil war, hadn't there?
Yes.
And kind of exile. Yeah.
Their jealousy they won't be jealous of Judah anymore. Judah's enemies will be destroyed. He basically describes in their time what it will be to have complete peace. So there's none of this hostility, none of this threat, and instead, incredibly, rather than Judah, God's people being drawn off to worship idols and goodness knows what else, the nations are brought in to truly worship the living God. Beautiful.
And this lovely picture in verse 15 of...
now tell us about that, because you love this, don't you? I didn't have time to mention it.
I'm not quite sure about it, but it certainly is referring back to the exodus of God's people out of Egypt across the sea to safety. And I think it's the idea of God, that the sea is a barrier, the water is a barrier, and God rescuing his people through the dangerous water. Here, the Gulf of the Egyptian Sea, the Euphrates River, the Euphrates was the kind of major river in Assyria. and God is going to kind of rescue his people through that.
It's like a second Exodus.
Yeah, like a second Exodus. It's that sort of picture of the Exodus. Again, it's also visual. You know, you could imagine this as a film or as a painting, or it is very, very visual, isn't it? So this mighty river, someone can cross over in sandals. You can imagine someone kind of picking through the puddles in their sandals, rather than this mighty river, because God has dried it up to rescue his people through it, and brought them back. And astonishing, even people from Assyria.
Yes.
So there are God's people within the enemy nations, which again is very strange, isn't it?
Do you think in verse 11, where he says that in that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people, is that because the first time was almost like the original Exodus, when he brought his own people out of Egypt? This is now, as you've been describing, a second Exodus, where he's bringing them out of all the nations.
Yes, I think so, because I think God is a God who rescues his people through the danger, and the water is often a picture of danger and judgment, isn't it? And God is like the ark, God rescues his people through the waters of judgment and brings them to safety. I think that's a melody all the way through the Bible, isn't it? Ultimately pointing to him, us being in Christ and being rescued through the judgments, and brought to himself.
Now, I want to just apply that a little, because I didn't really feel I had the time to apply it as I want to, but I want to apply it in I suppose three very clear ways. This picture of God reaching out with his hand and grabbing his people no matter what the situation they're in. I think the first thing to say is, although God does do that totally on his own at times. So, for example, we've seen many Iranians coming to Christ through dreams of Jesus. The normal way that God does that is through his people. He sends his people to reclaim them. And just three quick ways of applying that. If you were with us at the 10:30, you'd have seen that Safe Families interview. And Joel there was talking about, showed a video of Tam, and Tam's a single mum who's being helped by believers who are basically being like grandparents to her kids and an uncle to her. And you know, Tam may not be the kind of person you would expect to be saved. It doesn't matter whether we expect, I mean, you know, frankly, who do we expect to be? Would anyone expect Andy Upton to be saved? But God has reached in, and he's in the process, I think, of rescuing her and bringing her into his kingdom. Glorious. She's not too far away. Her life is not too messy. Then we have another couple in the church family who are working in a people group somewhere in the world where there is no known church. So it's a people group of many millions, and there's no known church. Just think about that for a minute. Nothing. And they're seeking to start a church.
So unlikely, isn't it?
So unlikely, but God is reaching his hand into that people group and bringing them out. Again, using my friends. And then the other way is for us. What a challenge. We've got the Passion for Life coming up in March. God can use us as his hand to reach in and grab who? Who would it be for you? Why don't we pray about these people and just ask that God would use us in their lives? I guess that's the kind of,
because God's always been the same God, hasn't he? It's just he's behaving here as he behaves now, rescuing people and bringing them to himself. And I guess that leads nicely into chapter 12, doesn't it?
Well, just before we go to chapter 12, I just want to reiterate, so I think it's significant that verse 10 he mentions a banner, verse 12 he'll raise a banner, and I think it's fairly obvious that in John chapter 12 Jesus has been meditating on these very verses, which I find very exciting. And he applies it for us. And so he says in John chapter 12, verse 32, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth will draw all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. And that word lifted up could also mean exalted, but it's this sense of a banner being raised up. And you put your trust in that banner, and you'll say, so how are these people brought out of the nations as they look to the cross of Jesus Christ?
So basically, chapter 11, verse 10, in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples, the nations will rally to him and his resting place will be glorious. That is Jesus, basically. That is Isaiah pointing forward.
I think it's Jesus as he dies on the cross.
As he dies on the cross, yeah. No, that is amazing, isn't it? That Isaiah points forwards to Jesus in that way. Great. So chapter 12, I think chapter 12 is a response to all of this, because chapter 12 is the end of a section. And at the end of each section of Isaiah, there is a worship and praise, and that's what chapter 12 is doing. And it's basically a hymn, it's a response to God's rescue. So just take us through that, Andy. Again, you didn't have a lot of time to...
No, and I mean, there's a lot here, but again, I think the things you can draw out of that is this lovely refrain of Isaiah's in verse 2, surely God is my salvation. How do I respond to that? I will trust and not be afraid. So what a challenge for us in the midst of our repetitive crises, deliverance cycles, to trust that one day he will sort all of this out, and to not be afraid, for I'm in his hands and he is with me.
And that response will look like praising him.
Well, I think that's the second thing, isn't it? It's praise. It's joyful praise, isn't it? Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Shout aloud, sing for joy, verse 6, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. And I think, I introduced this idea of the cycle with a melody that recurs during a piece of work. And often somebody introduced me to Baby Shark, and I couldn't get it out of my head, a dreadful kid song. And the only way to get a song out of your head is to hear another song.
Yes.
And I think we have this horrible cycle going on and on and on.
In our heads.
The way to get it out of our heads is to praise God for the way he will one day ultimately rescue us from it.
And I think it's not just that he will rescue us, but verse 2, he is the strength and defense. He has become my salvation. So a little bit like with Jesus, it wasn't just that Jesus would give us resurrection, but he is the resurrection. So these people singing, God has become my salvation, he is my strength and my defense. And then again, this lovely picture of drawing water from the wells of salvation. Again, that reminds me of Jesus and the living water.
Yes.
And the joy that comes from that. Was that when he was talking to the woman at the well?
Yes.
Isn't it?
John 4. Yeah.
John 4, and the joy that she has in terms of meeting him. And then the response is, again, very clear, is what we would call evangelism, isn't it? And mission.
Well, yes, it absolutely is that. But I think, I'm interested, proclaim his name, and make known among the nations what he has done, proclaim that his name is exalted. I think the problem is we think that's just talking to people who aren't yet believers, but I think it's just talking about the Lord.
Okay.
And one of the things that you and I have the privilege of doing, because people allow us to do it, is to every day talk aloud about the Lord. And it could be in a Bible study, could be to believers, could be to unbelievers.
To say he's great.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter. It's the blessing that is to us, because I hear myself proclaiming the name of Jesus out loud. And I wonder whether that's something all of us need to to do, because you need to hear yourself do
So
it. Whereas often it's
singing,
in our head,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Singing
Is really powerful, isn't it?
Just talking to your home group about what you believe.
Yes. Yes, verse 6, shout aloud and sing for joy. I think I remember reading that is the noise, that's like a really loud noise. It's kind of very passionate, heartfelt noise. It's not just kind of saying it loudly in a kind of British kind of way. It's kind of really letting rip, basically, shouting aloud and singing for joy. And
that starts a whole new conversation which we've got to have about what does worship of God look like. And it is singing. I love to just sing very loudly. Badly, but loudly. Sorry, everyone. But other people, it's a physical thing. They want to physically kind of raise their hands or physically respond by kneeling down.
Yes.
I think we have a very narrow view of what praise, worship of God is.
I think the Bible talks about the whole of body, whole of your body being involved in worship, and I think some of that is British kind of reserve, isn't it? Because there's not much reserved about this, is it? For great is the Holy One of Israel among you. That's the refrain, isn't it? And that's why we can trust him, because he is great and he's the Holy One of Israel. So yeah, thank you. Is there anything? So as you said, I'm going to remember. He'll hate me mentioning it, but Howard took these 6 verses. I think were his verses for the year. It was last year or the year before, and he basically had them as his verses for the year, and basically thought about them often. I think you could do a lot worse than that.
I'll at least use them maybe in the next week.
A lovely chapter, isn't it, in Isaiah. That we can really relate very closely to. Anything else you wanted to say, Andy?
No, that's great. As you say, this comes to the end of the first section of Isaiah, and we start the next section next week. Peter will be looking at these much darker passages where God starts to speak judgment to the nations, and we're going to have to think that all through. So, lot to come.
Thank you very much. Glad you could join us. And hope you will tune in again next week when we chat to Peter about his sermon.